Is the stereotype that India does not produce great deep tech companies true?
Well, infrastructure. See, it's not like the talent doesn't have the capability. Simple question as good as where are you 5 years from now, right? It's a very simple question. But then in a market that is just emerging, the 5-year curve is not fit. Not even the biggest of the biggest names in the market, no. You have to look at it from a 30-year lens. In hardware specifically, I think data is more valuable than instinct, right? D2C is a decent game, but for the white labeling boys, not for the boys who are, looking at building the technology inside it and are trying to build a factory for it, etc., etc.
Like, what does Jivraj in 2030 look like? I have a phone, I have a laptop, let's say I also have a headset.
Right.
What are the different things I'm doing with that headset?
You're doing everything that you're doing on a phone, a laptop, a television, or any screen that you're looking at.
Hello. Before we get started with this episode, I quickly wanted to share that we're now a part of the Zerodha Media Network. Thank you so much for watching. Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me an extremely exciting guest. Join me in welcoming Suraj Aiar, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Question What's Real. And today we're going to discuss all about extended reality, an ecosystem that they are building in full-fledged force, one of the only companies in the country to be doing so. Thank you so much, Suraj, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Jivraj, for having me.
Super excited to be hosting you because this is a space that I personally am also so curious about, and we haven't had any guest on the show who talks about it. It's futuristic, it's challenging from a hardware ecosystem standpoint,
Right.
And it's also something that very few companies in the world are doing and very few in the country are doing.
Right.
So excited to dive deeper.
Sure.
But before we sort of understand what you're doing, I'd love to understand that in a world of, constantly evolving technology, AI is happening. We had the wave of, hardware earlier. We had the Web3 wave, and now there's so much going on. What is extended reality in the, not just the imaginary future sense, but where are we today and where do you see this headed? And where in that landscape are you? If you
Right.
can give us a quick explainer, I think it'll set context before we dive deeper into specific elements of what you're doing.
Understood. Thank you so much for that question. So, to simplify it for our audiences, right? We work with a simple analogy that computing in general moved from a desk to a lap and then from a lap to a pocket.
Right.
Now, two things happened here. One thing is that people got a lot more mobile, right? They could carry a very powerful computer in their pockets.
Yeah.
But while that happened, the dexterity or the amount of input and output that we were doing as humans, that bit basically got handicapped in a way. Today it's a small rectangle that you're looking at, right? But there's a lot more information that you want to absorb.
Right.
But because you are handicapped in that manner, that you have this small screen, but like it's not allowing you to perform better, a question was asked in the general hardware community that can this form factor still deliver that much amount of information? And the answer was no, right?
Yeah.
There has to be a change in form factor. Now that change in form factor, people tried a lot of things, right? There are folding phones, for example.
Yeah.
But how much are you going to fold a phone,
Yeah.
right? And it's still going to be a rectangle window. Then the question was asked that, can we change this from a complete top-down restructure? That's how probably virtual reality as a space was looked at. Or head-borne computing, as we call it, it was looked at. And larger companies then dived much deeper, spent a lot of money in trying to convince themselves or convince a larger audience that this is probably going to be the next form factor. And now we feel that, yes, the form factor in the future has to be a head-borne form factor. So we try to tell ourselves that future mein to log sar pe hi computer pehnenge. That's pretty much a simpler, sort of idea as to where this market is heading.
Sure.
Now, of course, every market goes through its own ups and downs, right? We take inspiration from, say, the early times of Nokia, where they had simple phones that could do the most essential things, which was like calling and texting. And then at the same time, they had like a phone, like a communicator that allowed you to browse the web. Now, the gamut of phones, the gamut of headsets, at least in the market at this point of time, primarily are trying to find their own niche inside of which they can operate, as well as perfect that niche.
Sure.
Two things can happen out of this. One is that niche allows adoption to drive substantially and that killer use case to come out. And the second thing is every permutation of form factor or the concoction or the recipe that is needed to build that iPhone moment in this particular market probably gets justified. Because in this market at this point of time, people aren't trying to copy each other. Like you would see that more in the smartphone era of today, right? But back in the day, people were not trying to copy each other. If someone was building, say, a particular specification or particular feature set, they would say, you operate that, I would try to do a complete contrast, and then we'll see where it takes us.
Sure.
Because the market is too small. Everybody has only so many dollars left to try, and there is no real effort in trying and duplicating that particular idea, right? That's pretty much at what stage this is. Now let's talk about the market in general. This market you have to look at it from a 30-year lens, right? Personal computing in general, in any epoch, I mean, in any form factor, from mainframes to computers or anywhere, what we have noticed is it has taken a 15-year curve for that thing to happen.
Sure.
With the advent of AI, the amount of permutations per session would be much faster. I mean, the roadmap of, say, the next feature that comes in would be much faster,
right,
but then, and shorter, of course, but then it will still take the same amount of time for humans in general to adopt to this, form factor. I mean, I was like, I even tell a lot of people who ask me, I wrote and wrote and wrote through my schooling. And then the first job I got, I never held a pen in my hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 15 years of education where they hit you for handwriting, gave you bad marks for handwriting. But then now they ask me, how fast can you type on a keyboard?
Yeah.
Right? Probably in the future, that kid who's today using probably a keyboard in his classroom might not be using a keyboard in the future.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it still adds value, right? I mean, that it takes that time, like for humans in general, to make it like ubiquitous enough that it's, this is kind of common for me. I'm going to wear this on my head and I'm going to walk around. So yeah, that's probably the stage at which we are at.
Got it. Right. Can you contextualize further as to which are tasks which are currently not possible from a mobile device that can be used or done better with a headset that will possibly define the future?
Sure. I mean, let's talk about probably markets that we operate in, right? Because I at least probably have better exposure to those markets.
Sure.
Now, let's just take education for that matter. I mean, I want to teach a child about, what life is like on Mars. Or what ocean life feels like. Now, this sort of experience inside a classroom where a teacher has like a 2D screen and she's trying to show you, say, a video, right, is sort of not engaging enough. Because I come from the comic era, so I had the novel era, so I loved reading, and that's why I loved textbooks as well, right? Kids nowadays don't come from comics.
Yeah,
right?
Native to devices.
They need to watch video. And so video is not engaging enough, right? That's why people say that interactive sort of experiences are more engaging. Hence, you have a gaming market today. A gaming market which previously was a passive market like television viewing. That's probably from the era that we both come from. Now, the child today does not want to passively look at content. They just want to actively engage in it. Now, virtual reality inside a classroom solves for two things. One is it transports or teleports this child directly into Mars if at all they have to go there. And they're free to do whatever. Like they can interact in however simple or complex way that they want to, and they get that experience, right? And this has functions across the cognitive spectrum. I mean, if a child, for example, has, a fear of water, right? Now, this is firstly something that they would only probably assess or try to fix probably in their teenage, because that's when you get exposure of going into water, etc., etc. But even if a child just wears a headset in a simulated environment and shows any sort of, feedback that, no, this is not something I'm comfortable with, a lot of things can be done very early on, right? And this is just like a derivative value add that you're able to get beyond the fact that you're allowing this child to have a very engaging sort of learning experience. And like I said, like I wrote, and that writing never actually ended up adding any value. If I add that value to the child today, possibly that child might get trained on their workforce, or would be operating a crane or something remotely somewhere, which primarily requires a different form factor of a computer, and a mouse and a keyboard might not just be the right tools to engage. So, and education, the reason why I picked education as well is kind of specific because it answers the question in an overall metric. Right? Apart from going deep into a person who's probably 35 today using that headset.
Yeah. Well, that's super relatable. I think education is one that everybody will understand very clearly. So I think that's lovely. Awesome. I think we've understood context to where we are in the broad context of things. To summarize, we've seen computing evolve from a large screen to a small screen, and we finally want to be a part of the larger environment, which extended reality makes possible. Within that landscape, there are use cases like education. Talk to us about now what exactly you are trying to solve for. And for those who may not be familiar, if you can give us a scope of work, right? You're an OEM for a bunch of sort of B2B players. You're also building a broad ecosystem. You have a lot of content. You were talking about before the conversation began, a bunch of other interesting projects that are being worked upon as well, right? Give us a scope of work and where in this ecosystem do you fit today? And how did you get here also, more importantly, so that we have context and then we can dive again into specifics of how the manufacturing process happens, etc.
Right. So let's take locomotion for that matter, right? The initial part was that I want to go from point A to point B. Right. I used to have horses. Now I have this engine. I can put 4 wheels in it and I can move there, get there faster. Now, of course, when you start in this field, you don't know where it's going to go, right? That's pretty much where we are at, even 7 years, like haven't been there. Now, what are we trying to solve for? We have found specific people. I'm going to take the analogy of, again, locomotion because it's easier for people to grasp and relate. So I've found specific people who are, say, probably moving rocks instead of people, right? And all size fits all sort of equation, one size fits all, my bad. One size fits all sort of equation probably might not be the best fit. Right. But it is more important for that guy to move those rocks faster than for solving for people. And there is someone who's already solving for people. Right. And that's the need gap that we have found. Now, so, and like I said, from the Nokia reference, right, there is a specific sort of requirement that has to be tailor-made for a large strata of that industry or that specific market. And this allows us as an OEM or as a manufacturer have both the capabilities of being malleable, meaning if there is a real requirement and the market size is big enough, I can literally deliver focused products for that market and become a champion in that market, right? Rather than trying to, stitch a sort of gear to fit into that market, which in the end just becomes like just another tool that I have, but I'm not using the tool very effectively. Because in order for that specific person to use that tool effectively, I need to understand the specific person. And for that, like we kind of call ourselves consumer obsessed, right? We want, if there's a mining operator who wants a headset, we will spend months to try and understand where all the applications are, what are the problems, how this, like what are the safety standards that I need to do, what is the compliance requirement, etc., what kind of environments this guy is going to go into to take any decision. That is a color decision, material decision, even a finish decision, right? All of these things are very critical for us to look at a market and build for that market. And I think that at a nascent stage, where we are at right now, finding these gaps allows us to have firstly the capability to be versatile. I mean, I can build any spec that a larger brand can, right? And I can scale a market. That means that I can improve adoption for that specific skill set or for that specific impact curve that I'm trying to work on. And this compounds to a value which primarily is required to be had in the hardware game, because we are not building for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, right? We're building large infrastructure very horizontally at this point of time. Like if I have to look at it, I will invest money more horizontally than vertically, because the vertical impact of that, which is like shrinking of technology or something like that, is being taken care of by the larger players, right? What we need to do is horizontally integrate with pretty much every vertical, so that as that vertical curve happens, I have one SKU that is going into these markets and it's constantly compounding for me. And that creates, of course, there is a brand stickiness that gets created if you get there early on and you solve problems for specific markets.
Got it. So in summary, you are manufacturing headsets for specific vertical use cases by building a horizontal platform. So if I need something in education or construction tech, I can come to you as a company and you will manufacture those headsets for me. Awesome. Can you talk to us about, so there are 2-3 things which are, of course, obstructions. And when I first came across the company, these were the questions I had, which was, hey, there's a hardware is just typically difficult, right? People don't go into it because it requires capital. There is high gestation period. You have to get product right and you have to sell that product, which brings me to the second part, which is sales cycles, right? How do you convince like a large company to sort of buy from you,
Sure.
especially then, and then fulfill it. So
Right.
that's so sales and then manufacturing by itself. So maybe we'll tackle it one by one. Let's tackle the customer first, maybe.
Sure.
Can you define to us what largely your customer profile looks like?
Mhm.
And then what are the requirements that they are looking from you?
Right.
And then how do you convince them, right? So the
Mhm.
entire cycle of who the customer is, what are they looking for, and how do you convince them?
Okay. So, see, at this point of time, customers are varied in multiple different sort of industries. Now, for me, my customer, like primarily from a P&L point of view, the customer is my distributor because he's the one who funds my inventory, so to say.
Okay.
But this distributor has larger tech companies who are looking at, say, adding value more to the hardware. And what we try to do is we try to stitch this whole thing together. So, for example, a large, a system integrator company who's working with a mining operator has a problem statement that there are remote workers who currently are carrying a 1,000-page binder, and it takes them about, say, 40 minutes to find a problem statement and fix that problem because the information search itself is long. This is a brief. Now, we then go back to this because this person is pretty much talking to every single mining operator in the country. We are able to assess the scale of the problem, right? If I'm saving 40 minutes per engineer, how many engineers has he employed? And then how many companies like him exist, large or small, and how much time am I looking to save, right? Because this is sort of the sales pitch that he's going to end up going and selling. Now, now that bit is pretty big, or it is large enough for my distributor to be like, boss, this is a problem. If you are going to help me solve, let's solve that problem. Now we go back to the drawing board and we try to see what SKU we can modify maybe by 35%, 40%, which can solve both a critical problem that is there and of course can stitch this whole problem to solution system together. And we are able to also assess from a point of view that, okay, today if I start with this large customer, how many customers, how long is that P&L going to go, how much time it's going to take for me to find that generational change that I need to do, etc., etc. And over here, partnering with large distributors really helps us because they are fully into the system, right? And we cannot, like, no matter how much time we spend, like the scale at which they operate, we will never be able to operate, at least for now. So they help us understand the scope as well as the problem. Now we sit back, produce a bunch of headsets, find the right software partner to marry this headset and the software. Go tell the distributor that this is the sort of demonstration. You have to go and give this demonstration and try to do an on-field test and come back to me for a survey. So I'm, like I said, we are customer obsessed. This is the level of customer obsession we have. It's not like building a headset is hard. It's building a headset that primarily gives that end use that impact, because of which he will come back or will use that headset on a daily basis, which is hard, right? And from a creative lens, we try to keep ourselves low. Creativity is more towards optimization of SOPs in manufacturing, right? We keep it highly technical when it comes to consumer problem solving, because that's what we want to do right now. We want to get our technical prowess in terms of how these headsets gets manufactured and how much we can push ourselves when it comes to the design, the control on materials and all of that, how much we can do that. That's primarily what keeps us going. And this sort of gap analysis and then solving backwards from there basically helps us do that. I hope that answered your question.
Got it. Yeah. No, completely. I think this is very clear. Again, maybe to quickly summarize. So there's a large company with a problem.
Yeah.
They have a distributor. That distributor is going to tell you these problems. You validate and then come up with a curated solution for that for that large company and by at large that industry. And then you sort of sell that.
Correct.
Got it. No, that's super exciting. Talk to us about now maybe the hardware piece of it, right? And also just generally, considering that it's so difficult or just outside in looking, the stereotype is hardware companies take time, gestations are long, all of the things that I previously mentioned. How did you convince yourself to sort of dive deep into the neck with this problem statement, build a hardware heavy company? And then let's say in the example of you've gotten an order, how do you then sort of fulfill it? What is the cycle behind actually producing a headset? And also you don't own the software right now.
So we own the operating system
Okay.
and the software development kit, right?
Okay.
Which is the middle layer. which allows people. And then we have other tools, for example, publishing tools or remote assistant tools and all of that we also provide. Right. So there is a stack of software, but then our heart still relies on the hardware because that's where our capabilities are.
Yes.
Software internally, these are sort of, essentials, if I may, right? That has to go into any enterprise grade hardware to be sold.
Got it. So this is hygiene. But yeah, no, I'd love to understand how you tackle the hardware problem by.
Sure. So, I mean, I've been passionate about hardware for a very long time, right? I mean, even I was in a boarding school, but then the moment I came back, I started trading hardware in Lamington Road. I mean, you go to any shop over there and talk to them about Suraj, they'll tell you who he is. I mean, I know pretty much every shop, who they are, what they do, how they operate. I was obsessed with the whole trade system, how stuff gets imported, how it gets put together. This is the early days of assembling computers, right? I mean, I have...
What year would this be?
This is 2006, 2007. That would be the time. So this was the time when India in general was getting digitized. I mean, paper ledgers were turning into computers very simply, right? Even a dentist wanted a computer on his desk, a dentist who previously didn't. And just in my friend circle, the parents that I, like my friends' parents itself, they used to be like, "Arey Suraj so पूछते हैं ना, computer चाहिए हमें बस ये 2-3 काम करने हैं." So, and there was no, today you still have like your all-in-one PCs and it's easier to build or just buy a ready-made computer. But back in the day, it wasn't ready-made. Everything had to be bought by some. So I used to assemble it and I used to make a small margin over there, right? But then these guys had no clue what they need. And if they would go to say a shop, at least like the shopkeeper is going to sell them high banged up specs and all of that, which is not going to really add value to them.
Correct.
So that's sort of initial still towards hardware or, building, packaging hardware and shipping that was with me. And that just stuck with me. I mean, I always wanted to make computers, but then I grew old enough. I had a decent exit very recently. I spent about 5 years of my life in China. So using that, I understood that, okay, boss, and exit solved for survival, right? So I had the ability or the appetite to take risk. And now it was like once that you've solved for survival, now I was like, if I'm taking a risk, I don't want to take like a short-term risk. Like I want to take a long-term risk, no matter how long it takes. But I want to build computers. Then comes the question, what kind of computer? And then that's where the whole headset sort of ecosystem got built. Because I was fortunate because consider this, that like the AR/VR boom happened in the West, a massive AR/VR boom also happened in the East in China. Okay. And I was front and center there, right? Pretty much most of the core component OEMs or, the peripheral guys or the R&D guys, prototyping guys, all these guys were my ex-colleagues, right? Who started this whole industry. And it's a very tight-knit, small vendor pool, like compared to say larger industries like smartphones or laptops, right? And none of these guys come from legacy brands. Like you will not find any of the common names that you hear in electronics come in and say that, okay, I'm going to start building a headset. It's kind of a complete top-down restructure. You have to unlearn a lot and learn a lot. And these guys are too big right now to do that. So they would probably end up acquiring one of these people. But then doing that for a small market like this that potentially would get somewhere is not something that is yet set in.
It's too experimental.
Yeah, it's too experimental. True. So, that's pretty much the backstory on what started this and where we are at. And like I said, I've solved for survival. So I think I'm going to now play this along for a very long time. And like the vision statement is that there is potential to build a large consumer electronic or like brand out of India, right? But start with like what I've convinced myself is that don't put your hands into consumer. Start with enterprise, right? Take inspiration from your Hewlett Packards and your Dells, who started as enterprise stacks and then moved to consumer probably after they were like too big, right? And that's pretty much what our focus is and what keeps us humble.
Got it. So, no, that's super exciting. My core takeaways. So survival you solved for, which is like you bought the freedom that are the bottlenecks to building a hardware company, which is
very necessary.
Which are primarily capital and time?
Capital, time, and exposure, right? You need a lot of exposure.
Past exposure,
experience and all of that, which I couldn't have gotten, sitting inside a job or trying to, pass on my paychecks by 30% by just, joining a competitor or whatever kids are doing nowadays. So that was not it. And secondly, for me, moving to the West never made sense. I mean, I was like, the West is basically employing the East to do the job, right? So why not just travel East? Like, it's kind of a no-brainer. But then East is also quite expensive, like apart from India for sure. But then it is very expensive to, live in a country like China for that matter. So I needed a job and I got a brilliant opportunity to work there. It was a large tech company there. It's one of the top 3 tech companies over there. The company's market cap is probably 4 times that of Twitter. So, I mean, like that way, and these people don't even talk about it. I mean, most people don't even know about these companies, right? So that was something, and that probably even now sits into our company culture. Like, we don't try to talk about things. We just try and do it, put our heads down and keep moving forward. So yeah, like a lot of that exposure probably has helped me stay resilient and, build this sort of a boring hardware company out of India.
That's super. I think especially for founders who want to build in hardware, there's a core learning. The contra, if I'm passionate about something, I'm a young founder, I don't have the money. What should I do? Like, India is not known to have the risk capital to sort of fund hardware projects, right?
True.
Very few success stories. Now, thankfully for, Ola Electric, Ather, all of these, some venture-backed companies as well are doing well. In drones, we've seen some successes.
True.
But what would your advice to a younger Suraj be who's starting out? Let's assume he does not have the exit that you had. What should I still do today to actually get started?
Good question. See, what I would try to do is I would try to fit myself into a value add of at least 1 or 2% of the bill of material. The bill of material is everything that goes into developing a hardware, right?
Okay.
Now, it's not necessary that I need to build hardware. That's expensive.
Or the complete product.
Yeah, in the complete product, I would not try to add any value. I would just try to add value on something very, very insignificant to the end user, but highly significant to the person, to the manufacturer or to the brand, right? It could be as simple as what kind of paste would go into sticking 2 pieces of plastic together. Something as simple as that.
Got it.
A thermal compound that would probably, decrease the need of fans because fans are too noisy, right? Something as simple as that, like, because there are enough problems to solve. And a lot of times, guys who are obsessed with what they're building cannot solve a lot of problems. I mean, I personally have noticed that, right? So from that point of view, I think that's the niche that I would want to operate in, because over there also you can make a lot of money, right? But how people look at it, I want to sell something worth $100. Don't. Sell something worth 10 cents, right? You can still make a 30% margin on that. And just consider how many times that customer is going to come back asking for that thing worth 10 cents.
And at least get started.
Yeah. And that makes, like, for the example I gave, it created stickiness. But I mean, like, that creates the stickiness that gives you direct access into the drawing board of a brand or of hardware. Because now you're an integral component of that bill of material, right? Now, because of that, you have exposure on rates, you have exposure on timing, cycles, everything. Trade in general, like the logistics of this stuff, right?
You are exposed to the entire cycle.
Yeah, and that is the most important thing. I mean, without that, it's going to be very difficult for you, right? Otherwise, you can just do what other brands are doing. Just call a Chinese supplier, stick your logo and just import it. But like, if you really, really want to do like, hardware, or you want to build something out there, that's the simplest part where you can start. Right?
That's awesome. I think that's super actionable. That is a very, very, very tangible advice and would be very helpful for anybody watching. Is the stereotype that India does not produce great deep tech companies true? Like, from your lens, who's in the, thick and thin of things?
Well, infrastructure. See, it's not like the talent doesn't have the capability.
Okay.
The issue is I am now 23, 24, fresh grad with stuff that I've been educated on, which is like archaic. Point number 1. Point number 2 is what a kid is working in China when he's 23 or 24 versus the infra that they possess, right? Just to play around. It's a massive contrast. I mean, I know 19-year-old kids who are building some crazy stuff over there, right? So that's primarily the lacking bit. Okay. Second thing is, in general, the risk appetite for bold, bodacious ideas cannot happen because a child doesn't have the ability to build something right here using the tools over here and show you something from scratch. There is no idea at all. I have met a lot of people who just say, "Arey, aap China chale jao na." क्यों बैठ के बना रहे हो, right? अब फोन लगा दो, मैं ही लगा के दे देता हूँ. Like that's pretty much the idea. People have gotten addicted to the ease when it comes to building brands in hardware, and they think that building brands is primarily just sticking a label and adding a couple of 2-3 features and proliferating that through marketing. And well, what to do? It's a spoiled audience, so it's fine. But if you still stick to it and you still persevere, I don't think it's going to be that hard. You just have to convince yourself. That's pretty much it.
Got it. So talent is existent, infrastructure is not existent, risk capital needs to go up. But if we combine all of that together, we'll probably come out better. And we have to avoid the laziness, you're saying.
True.
Yes. Got it. No, that's super interesting. Let's get back to the company building journey, right?
Sure.
So we covered the fact that, okay, how you do sales. We've understood who your customer is. We've understood how you tackle the hardware problem. What we need to understand is how the hardware gets made.
Sure.
So if you can maybe talk to us about in the storyline, right? That you have an order now. Let's say you have to produce a couple thousands of headsets, right? And you have the hardware process in place. What will you now start doing as a company to make sure you can deliver the order in time? Talk to us about the entire process, because most people are unable to visualize what happens in the background, right? We see the end product, and that's pretty much what it is.
Right.
So it'll be super fascinating to hear the process.
Awesome. It might get a bit technical, so be prepared. Anyway, I'll try to simplify it as much as I can.
Please.
So let's break down a headset, right? A headset is about a bunch of plastic and metal parts, right? Which go into the outer body and a bunch of the chassis internally. There's a heatsink, there's a battery, there's a PCBA, and there's a display.
Okay.
And then there are other electronics like your audio systems and your jacks and your USB Type-C stuff and all of that.
Okay.
Now, the stuff that has the largest shelf life is the most inexpensive part of your bill of material. Like your plastic parts, your metal parts, and all of that. Because you keep it anywhere, if you just keep it hermetically sealed properly, nothing's going to happen to it. It's not going to, depreciate in terms of value. And the most expensive parts are your displays, your PCBs, right? Your heat sinks, your sub-assemblies and all of that, like sensors and all that stuff. So the first thing that we do is we always plan how much we're going to produce, or what is a achievable target, right? And we take a sort of call or trade call on that, and we produce that stuff, the inexpensive stuff first. Okay. And we keep that ready, right? Because I know that if not in this financial year, the next financial year, at least I can use this, right? Sure. And I take a decent enough risk over there, depending upon the amount of exposure I have to the customer or that industry and that particular, the CAGR as we call it. Now, once we do that, for example, and we always have our vendors on tap, right? I mean, for example, today I get an order, I can set up a roundtable with my guys just tomorrow and start placing orders for the expensive stuff, which is the PCBAs, the displays and all of that. We try to marry it. Now there's a sort of internal assessment that we have on which vendor operates how quickly and who can operate better. It takes time. Like initially you're not going to be butter smooth, but then through time, through understanding humans in the end of the day, you'll figure it out. So once you do that, we know whom to call first, whom to pressurize more, etc., etc. And the procurement process begins. Now, consider it a 100-day trade cycle, right? Or day one, I have a purchase order or an advance from my customer, and I have this basic bill of materials, and I start the procurement process. It takes about 12 to 15 days for the entire bill of material to now reach my facility, right? Then what happens is picking and sorting happens, which is during the picking and sorting process, we need to do a QC for especially brittle stuff like displays and heat sinks and all of that. Sure. So there's a proper QC process happens. Pilferage happens there, certain amount of stuff gets returned, or QC fails, for example, right? And there's always a backup shipment ready. So if I am placing an order for 100 displays, I will place an order for 200 displays, where the 100 either will get consumed in the next production cycle or will get consumed in this production cycle itself, right? And there are different sorts of risk ratios, which both the vendor as well as the buyer, both of them understand that this is there, especially in displays. Now, once you do that, you set up the assembly line. Picking and sorting is done. QC is passed. Everything reaches the assembly line. Now, in the assembly line, all your bays get populated with the different stuff that you need to do. And the day is picked that on this day, we will start at this time. And we keep a certain target for that day. How much do we want to produce? Could be 120, 150, 200, 300. And we split that batch. Basis the first 3 days of production, we are able to assess and communicate to our customer when we are going to be able to deliver, etc., etc. This is the case when it comes to a product that is in early stage, right? But then there are products that are fully mature, where this stuff is already automated. I know how much business I'm going to do in education over the next year, right? And I can take a 20% risk on that because that display can be repurposed in some other assembly line. Probably only 2 or 3 components cannot be assembled, and they're inexpensive, or I can take a risk on them, right? So those are the ways in which we operate for the automated business. So there are very mature businesses. So we have bays that are specific for mature SOPs, and there are bays that are for R&D purposes only, meaning where only handpicking happens. There's no robotic assembly or something like that. So that's pretty much how this stuff gets split.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Amongst all the different things, of course, you have suppliers for some of the raw materials, but I'm guessing there is IP in some of the things that you're doing, right? Where is the proprietariness of what you do in the manufacturing chain?
Got it. So everything is proprietary if you look at it that way, right?
Okay.
I mean, let's just say that the injection mold for my plastic components, right? All those injection molds are of course outsourced, but then dictated by me. The CAD drawings start at our space, and then of course our trademarks or our registration marks or copyrights or whatever are stuck onto that mold forever, right? And these molds are on our books, but then are leased out to any contract manufacturer that I am contracting that to. Cloning of that is, also not allowed, and it's difficult. Like there are nicks that we put inside which will make sure that 100% clone can never be created. There are plates that we keep with ourselves which don't go to the contract manufacturer, so he cannot try and do that.
Sure.
Now that is on parts. Then there is your PCB design, for example. Now Qualcomm, who's primarily the biggest chip vendor when it comes to this market, gives everyone a reference design, right? Everybody gets that reference design, but then that reference design is like the one size fits all wala equation.
You tweak it
you have to tweak it substantially. I mean, the type of battery that you work with, the type of heat dissipation technology that you use, the kind of display that you work with, the amount of sensors that you strap on it, etc., etc. Then the whole sandwich in itself, right? Putting this whole thing together, what are the layers, how many times I turn my screws, for example. All of those things, like the most simplest to the most complex things matter. Right. And apart from that, there is the operating system in general, because the operating system is like the nucleus, right? I mean, without that, your battery is not going to run the way we claim that it would run, right? A battery has a capacity, but then you need to optimize it to run on your headset at a particular time, at a particular temperature, and all of that. So every single step, there is a sort of intellectual property that is attached to it. Booking this stuff, primarily, the auditors will be able to answer, but then on our books, like the assets are primarily this stuff.
Got it.
Right.
No, that's super helpful. I mean, to get a complete context to, which are the things which are proprietary and the entire process. Can you break down the company journey to help us understand? Like usually in a hardware company, it takes time to build the first prototype, and then once you've built out the product, you can automate it. Then that's when you start getting orders. Was it a similar journey in your case as well, where the first couple of handsets took a lot of time to develop that IP, to develop differentiation, to get the product out, and since then it's been simpler? Or how did that play out in your case?
So in our case, because there was a fairly mature and already permutation spent ecosystem that I came from, which was China.
Yeah.
I had to just find the problem statement and go there and buy a mold. Because for someone else, that mold is useless. He tried it in his market, and it was so different molds or different components from different people, and putting that jigsaw together was primarily my job initially. Right. And that allowed me to understand, okay, dude, how much did you spend on this mold? Right. And what kind of talent did you use? What kind of software did you use? How many times did you have to make it? What material is this mold made out of? What is the life of this mold? How much time does it take for it to get cracked, or for it to get grains to start coming in? What kind of technology standards are you using, etc., etc. This stuff was the first 3 years, right?
Okay.
First 3 years of just understanding and just buying stuff that was of no use to someone, or someone was using it, but then not for the same requirement that I was using it.
Sure.
So that's the way we started. this allowed two things to happen, right? Like I said, engineers in India don't have that level of exposure. Now that level of exposure comes from the fact that, okay, I bought this mold, I bought every derivative permutation that he has created, which is just sitting for like catching dust in his warehouse. I got all of that to India. Now I've given it to engineers over to now reverse engineer it. This allowed them the capability to quickly learn what they have to with a narrow focus, right? See, when you allow room for creativity, you need to have a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah.
Once we got into the game, I, as a person who still wants to generate revenue, find that customer and move a cash flow cycle, I don't have the time for creativity. Even though I can give money and keep a team for creativity, I still need technically sound people who can just take this stuff and get going very quickly. Right. And that was the initial way, like sort of a jugaad that we used to, make this happen.
Yeah.
And that internally trained the team to understand what quality we have to work with. So now if they're talking to a big vendor here, they know what quality standards they need to dictate, right?
Sure.
These are 25, 27-year-olds talking to companies that are doing business of say probably 1,000, 2,000 crores. They're not going to be taken seriously unless they know how to command a room,
Sure.
right? So, and they could do that only when they understood this stuff. And understanding that was sort of the initial bit, which really helped them gain confidence and trust in this organization that, okay, this, and then when they go and speak to a vendor and they say that, this costs about 1 crore or 2 crores to build, they understand that, okay, the stuff that I have is very, expensive and is very serious. I need to be very careful with it. I need to understand and study it properly in order for me to drive impact in my job. So that's sort of the way in which this whole thing got stitched together.
Super interesting. In terms of technical expertise and creativity, are the two skills mutually exclusive in the ecosystem, or do you find them in the same people as well, and then they end up driving innovation?
Well, it's like a tightrope, right? You have to lean on both sides when it comes to this, but then certain places there is like zero room for creativity, right? See, it's a boring job. It is creating mundane, repetitive tasks that allow you to have consistency over long periods of time, and being able to assess when a sort of formula of consistency is not going to be consistent enough. That 0.1% variable is going to create a delta, and then predicting that ahead of time and then solving for it. Once you have solved for this mundane consistency, then the only thing that you're doing is solving for that 0.1% of inconsistency that could happen. Right.
But this is also when the final product is ready, right?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. So, see, okay, let me go back a bit. So a product goes through 3 stages, right? It starts with EVT, which is engineering validation testing. Then there is DVT, which is design validation testing. Then there's PVT, which is production validation testing. What you did during your engineering validation will not, or any creativity that you applied there, probably might almost 90% of the time will not translate to your DVT.
Okay.
Right?
And these are separate teams.
Yeah. Okay. Correct. These are separate teams. So now, for example, somebody made a beautiful design or a design render of a headset, right? He's gonna get very disappointed the moment the engineering team comes and sits on it, right? He'll have to completely work around it. My expectation from the creative person is not to understand engineering or to work to engineering. It's to marry those things together in the best way possible. And that's where a guy like me comes in, who has to weigh in both of these things, as well as the cost that it will,
the business understanding.
The business understanding of it. Like, do I really need to discount it because that looks better, or that material, even though it doesn't look that great or feels that great, is needed because this customer is going to end up dropping that headset too many times. Right. And I'm sorry that the dye that you're looking at or the color that you're looking at might not go into it, because of which my creative designer is going to be like, man, I worked so hard in finding that one color that's going to pop this whole thing out, but then it's not going through. So a lot of sacrifices happen across the pool, but then in engineering or in technical, you can't make those sacrifices. Right?
Because so engineering will govern performance.
Correct. Not just performance, like even for design to be retrofit. Right?
Yeah. Then the next step is in design, and then step after that is
the mundane bit, which is the production
repeatable.
Yeah, it has to be repeatable. So now again, like color, we think that it's easy, but it's not. I mean, consider making one mold of plastic, which is the front of a headset, in a particular shade of orange over 1,000 times. You'll probably have to stop the process and start the process by doing a QC and, throwing a pilferage of say 5 units every time, because the consistency won't be met. There aren't machines that can do that.
Sure.
right? No matter how expensive the machine you buy. Now, we are not paint people. We don't come from paint, right? But we still need to operate paint now, right? So that becomes like a simple problem on an inexpensive thing, but then you can't solve it. And then the amount of hours it's adding to my production cycle is a different ballgame altogether, right?
Yeah.
So just because of that, I needed to make this sacrifice.
Got it. No, that's super interesting, and I think that really clarifies a lot of the manufacturing process.
Yeah.
Awesome, Suraj. As we sort of proceed, and this was a good segue to actually understand how talent in hardware in India is, right? Because you mentioned that okay, there are these 3 sets of capabilities that you need on the
Yeah.
product specifically, and then ancillarily sales, etc. Right? What in your you were telling me that you have a 16-member team. It's a very nimble, tight knit group. How have you gone about hiring the right set of people? What are the skills that you look for? Is hardware something where you need technical expertise to an extent that you can't hire experimentally, or is that untrue? Would love to understand the entire ambit.
Got it. So, see, primarily we have taken a very different approach when it comes to hiring in general, right? This is again a very heavy permutation game because good talent you can figure out over an interview or a technical round. But then, is that talent the right fit for your specific product? Is a pretty difficult sort of an equation. So what we do is we do 100-day sort of engagement with the person, right? Where there is no strings attached. We just tell them that this is a new ecosystem, right? Because there are deep trade secrets, you'll have to go through like a non-disclosure process. But then we will formally engage with you in a much deeper sort of project or talk about a formal engagement for a longer period once we have assessed the synergies during this 100-day phase.
Okay.
And then we split that into 30, 30, 30 and 10. So 30 days is just primarily exposure. So if they come from a certain background and they fit a certain profile, we will try to give them creative tasks for a bit. Then we'll give them highly technical, repetitive tasks for a bit. Then we'll try to give them managerial tasks for a bit. This is generally how the first 30 days goes. And those tasks are more exploratory in nature, right? There is no end goal. The objective is what is the steps that you take. That's all that we're looking at. Then the next days is more about implementation. We will tell you that, okay, you want to work on this. We will give you a choice that there are 3 options. You can pick one of those options and then you can double down on that and you just keep working. Your objective is to achieve something in 45 days. So 30 days are done. Now you get into a 45-day cycle. In that, on the 30th day, we will be able to assess what is the stage of progression. And let's derive that from an example, right? For example, we give you a very broad sort of a question that draw a human being, right? Now, there are 2 types of people. One person will try to draw and we will give you very limited amount of time. That is not enough time for you to draw that entire human being. Now, what we will try to assess is there are certain people who will just draw a foot, but that foot will look so photorealistic that you can bet on the fact that if given enough time, this person will build an entire human being. And then there will be another person who will try to just build that human being. But then we will assess things like, is the anatomy right? Because the time was not good, right? How much detail they managed to achieve in that limited amount of time. What type of human being they tried to, build. These are different sorts of cognitive traits that we are looking at, assessing. Because this is something that we have assessed by ourselves. These are tests that pretty much me and my co-founder both have also gone, where we have critiqued each other just to assess what is the steps, when do we need to, take a decision, like a critical decision, and when do we need to, just draw the line and be it like, boss, this is human. Like, in the end of the day, you're talking to a human. Probably you're trying to achieve something in too little time, and you can't expect that out of, a larger gamut of people. Now, this 100-day process, and then of course, just to finish it, the last 10 days then goes into the information exchange. It's a review. We write them or we sit with them for like over 4 hours, where we explain to them that this is what the critical feedback is, why they are a good fit or a bad fit, and if they're a good fit, what they need to do, and if they're a bad fit, what they could work on and move on, right? So this is sort of how the 100-day process goes. Now, there are certain verticals that require heavy obsession, right? And certain verticals that I can wear multiple hats and do. Things that probably require only, say, an hour of communication, but then in that day, that particular process or step does not will not get repeated, because someone else out there, or a vendor or someone, would be doing that job then for the next 12 hours. And then you have to go back to that person to do a progress check or a quality check or a regression or something like that. Now, so those places we don't we try not to hire, because that thing is still just taking 1 hour of my day. But there are certain tasks that require, say, 8 hours a day, and massive amount of obsession attached to that particular one task to be perfected, right? Those are like SOPs on the line, or like I said, CADs or IC designs or something like that, where everything is needed, right? Critical thinking is needed, obsessive repetitive tasks without getting bored, just same amount of effort as well as sweat is put into that. So those places, and then through the process of this 100 days, we're able to easily nitpick on where that person sits and where that person, succeeds. Now, of course, this whole process of hiring has evolved through time, right? I mean, initially it was way too difficult. Our churn was very bad. And then now we are sitting at a decent sort of churn. And see, because it is a factory in the end of the day. It has to be a human machine interface, which is like a well-oiled machine, which we are looking at building. That for us is pretty much what we are looking at from a full-time point of view, right? And once a larger opportunity comes, say for example, a larger market opens up where there's a larger requirement, we will need both sets of people, which are first the obsessive set, who can then obsess over that particular product or that particular SKU, and then people who can then shadow and learn, which is learn the SOPs and then implement those SOPs and then now own those SOPs. That's pretty much how we're looking at hiring in general.
Got it. That's super exciting. I think helps understand. And this is barring the factory, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about staff inside a factory, that's labor. So we try.
This is the corporate office.
Yeah, this is the corporate design, R&D, everything, all those guys. Like every single person is responsible for something that happens in the factory, right? But then you're talking about like labor, right, at the factory. So see, it's not a large enough business at this point of time that you can hire like large talent pools at this point of time, right? And our production cycles are on a quarter basis. Sure. So if I get a team, I will probably employ them for 3 weeks or a month.
They're contracted.
They're contracted manpower workers. Houses that give us this stuff. It helps us with, again, 2 things internally. One is because my team is now still perfecting the process of manufacturing, right? So like I said, it's a man-machine interface where there is human element involved and where there is robotic element involved. Do I need machine operators, or can hands actually do that job? This is something that we assess, but we need a larger data set of humans to try this on. The same SOP to be done, while the end result has to be consistent, the quality and everything, right? So that's sort of a hacked way in which we are, hiring as well as managing our manpower.
That's super exciting, because I think gives a ringside view to talent in just like a hardware specific company.
Sure.
So that's super helpful. To complete this loop of company building, we've discussed the customer, the manufacturing process, the behind the scenes, the talent. I think the last part is the resource of capital, right?
Right. The elephant in the room.
Yes. A lot of people talk about, narratives like India doesn't have enough risk capital for hardware projects, and just broadly hardware startups take a lot of money, right? Purely because money, time, human capital, these are the prime resources that you need to build a company. You've chosen to bootstrap the company. How has that journey been? What does that mean for you to manage cash flows? How intensive is the process? Does that inhibit risk capital because of paucity of it? While you may have capital to put into the business, you can't put infinite amounts, right?
True.
So if you can walk us through the mindset, the decision of choosing to bootstrap, and also how that impacts the business, and what your take on funding for hardware-led startups in the country is. I think that would cover a very interesting set of decision-making factors for many people who are either in hardware companies or otherwise, to understand the landscape.
Got it. So, of course, initially when I came back, I did do my VC rounds, right? I mean, I knocked on every VC door that had DeepTech or something in their SEO and tried to speak to these guys. What I understood was the hard-hitting questions that they ask. And those, apart from appetite, I mean, I'm talking to you from my own personal journey, there are hard-hitting questions that they ask that I could not really answer or envisage.
Okay.
Simple question as good as, where are you 5 years from now? Right? It's a very simple question, but then in a market that is just emerging, the 5-year curve is not fit. Not even the biggest of the biggest names in the market know.
Right.
So me as a guy coming in 25, 26 years of age, coming and telling you that this is where it's going to be 5 years from now is not justice to your time or your capital.
Sure.
So that's one reason of bootstrapping. Second reason of bootstrapping was that was more fairly a mature sort of answer I told myself 2 years after I got into the business was I need that freedom because I don't know where I'm going to go. All I know is I'm in the, like going back to my analogy, I'm in the business of locomotion. Who I'm going to build locomotives for? And is that going to return value? And then can I also repeat that in different verticals of industry is something that still required time. And, along the way, I'm really grateful to, the type of relationships that I've built through my vendor pool and all of these. These guys go hard in, they're all in with the money, right? So it's not my 5 rupees. It is everybody's 100 rupees that makes the product.
Absolutely.
Your relationships that you build, the type of truths and lies that you, utter, your words are very, very valuable, at least in both sides, the back end and the front end. First, you need to perfect your back end. You need to try smaller experiments to try and see. And not everybody is, doodh ka dhula hua for that matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are going to be guys who are going to cheat you, scam you, whatever. So you have to go through that journey. This cannot be done when you are sitting on investor money, right? This is all experimental. Everything is risky. Over here, because I had the privilege of, spending out of my savings, and that was throwaway money for me. I mean, I had solved for survival. Investments were made for me to wake up in the morning, eat those 3 meals, buy myself whatever clothes I need, and live in a decent lifestyle. So once I solved for that and I had more money left, I was like, I need to put this in something that I can, that's my mutual fund, right? That's a mutual fund whose return I will decide. Absolutely. And that is going to come out of my blood, sweat, and grit. So that's one thing. The second thing is, like I said, relationships. Relationships help you go a very long way. I mean, this is a business of compounding, right?
Yeah.
Today, you go to him for, say, a requirement of 100 units. Tomorrow, you're going to go to him for a requirement of 1,000 units. And he needs to have that appetite of taking that risk at 1,000. Otherwise, your whole, this thing is going to fail.
Right.
So, and as you grow, if they are growing, that motivation has to constantly be there to, keep giving back and keep compounding, because it's not just you putting. So for example, you traded $100 and you made 120. So now you have $20 more. Every single guy with that $20 in your pool has to keep putting that $20 back and trying to keep compounding this for that return to happen, right? So it's a sort of a entire economy of number of businesses that you're going to build with. And your suppliers are like your co-founders. Like if I have to put it in a way, it's just that they cannot sit on your cap table, so they created their own cap table. And they have to find their own set of investors to scale their business, right?
Sure.
But this whole thing has to work very well. And yeah, that's the way you're able to, once you have that, once you have done that bit, which takes a fair amount of time, it takes about a year and a half for you to do, then and only then I feel that you should start even talking to your colleagues or your friends that, boss, now I am mature enough to try. Right? Until then, don't put down that big dollar. Until then, just go out, seek people, meet people, build your relationships, understand this at very small scales. Have a grand vision. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't bet on the grand vision directly. You need to assess your grounds, substantially, very, very critically before you jump into this larger risk pool of people.
Well, that's amazing. I think what I'm taking back is freedom and relationships. These are the 2 most important components to be able to grow bootstrapped in a hardware business. That is incredible. Awesome. I think we've covered a crucial part because I think this is a question. This was the most received question that I got also for a deep tech business which has to be bootstrapped or VC funded. In terms of where we are and where we are supposed to go ahead, right? We started the conversation talking about what the landscape looks like.
Right.
For you as a company, now it's been 7-8 years. You've now proven the product in a couple of industries, and now you're sort of scaling up.
Right.
We're also hitting this technological wave of trying to finally imagine where we will be. There is more adoption, and I'm guessing this is only growing. Can you paint us a picture to where the company is headed, The 5-year question that you were unable to answer maybe in
Sure.
2017, what does that look like today?
We know, we understand that whatever we thought we could do, we're doing decently well.
Mhm.
We want to keep doing that. And then with the level of capital that we currently possess, we want to horizontally grow and run multiple permutations at the same time. So
Okay.
previously, for example, I doubled down on education and I spoke fairly a lot about it, primarily because it took us 5 years to crack education, right?
Mhm.
And that became our bread and butter for a fair period of time. That allowed us to experiment in, say, defense, healthcare, skilling and training, etc. So because those are more expensive markets, more amount of capital is needed, more amount of patience is needed for those markets, and riskier markets,
Sure.
right? Education is a market I can just go to a school and do my test trials, but I can't do that in defense, for example, right?
Mm.
I would need to go through an entire chain of command in order to get there, and that requires, of course, like I said, capital as well as patience. Now today, because we possess that, we are able to tackle, say, 4 markets or address 4 markets with 4 SKUs or 3 SKUs or whatever that is the answer that we need to do, that we need to come up with. But that's pretty much where we are at. We want to compound and grow horizontally in multiple key markets in which as per our thesis right now, we want to enter healthcare, defense, and skilling. These are 3 markets that we see both domestic as well as export potential in. And these markets have a higher a more important problem statement that can be solved using head mounted computers in general, and those are problems that we want to solve for.
Sure.
Right? So that's pretty much where we are going now. Of course, as we grow, now I think over the next 5 years we would have the ability, the capital, the infrastructure, and everything to look at consumer as a play.
Mhm.
And I feel that this will basically intertwine with the fact that the whole ubiquitousness of headsets, like the topic in general, that okay, people will wear this stuff on their heads. The form factor's comfort will become as good, probably as good as just sunglasses or your general prescription lenses. So shrinking of technology, in general, market adoption as a whole, and us having the ability to prove ourselves in the consumer market is the next 5 years for us. And for that, a sheer, again, focus towards compounding in enterprise is where we are gonna seek our next compounding benefits.
Got
That's
it.
pretty much it.
So enterprise expansion into other verticals and eventually becoming a consumer brand,
Correct.
shrinking form factor.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel such a investor having asked that question.
Fine.
That was very typical, but no, I think that's helpful. Beyond the company, can you
Mhm.
also, from a very simple consumer lens, talk to us about what does Jivraj in 2030 look like? I have a phone, I have a laptop. Let's say I also have a headset.
Right.
What are the different things I'm doing with that headset?
You're doing everything that you're doing on a phone, a laptop, a television, or
Okay.
any screen that you're looking at, right? Imagine, because this is now screens in thin air.
Okay.
It's your Tony Stark moment in general, right? But it's not going to be just blue holograms. It's going to be red, green, and blue holograms.
Yeah.
And simple stuff like, how big a screen can you put inside the back of a car, right? BMW did a phenomenal job with the new big car that they launched, right? It's a fairly wide screen. But what if I told you for probably half the price, you could wear an AR glass today, right? Which gives you like an IMAX level screen inside the back of your car. You could do that, but then it's hard to believe. And because it's
Yeah.
not ubiquitous enough, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of wearing a computer on your head is not ubiquitous enough.
Right.
Now, people have tried simple things like taking core functions, like deriving back to the Nokia equation that, okay, I'll build a sunglass with audio capabilities. So people don't wear AirPods anymore. They wear a sunglass with audio capabilities. They probably only listen to music and take calls, right? Okay, what if I add a camera to it? That's the next step. Then what if I add a display to it, which is probably just, stuff that notifications that come on my smartwatch all the way, straight up in my eyes. This is the simpler stuff that we are, like, brands or other people are experimenting when it comes to the consumer adoption curve to again convince themselves that this is the holy grail of form factors, right? We all know for a fact that holographic technology is physically impossible, right? It's physically impossible. There's no science attached to it. You can't project or stop photons of light in thin air. It's just not possible, right? So that idea has to be still fulfilled, though. I mean, everybody's watched Star Wars, right? I mean, you want to, and everybody is like, in terms of tech, we're technically making science fiction real. So that's pretty much the inspiration attached to doing something. But then not every time is the technology the same way you like saw it in a movie, but the same sort of feeling can be delivered through a form factor. That's pretty much how Jivraj in 2030 is going to look at life. He's going to wear something that is very comfortable, that he can wear on his head for like hours together. Probably how much time he carries a phone in his pocket or an iPad in his hand or a laptop on his lap, right? And he's going to consume pretty much every bit of content that he is today, but in a more comfortable, in a more humane form factor. That's pretty much how this market is going.
Got it. So I'll be recording podcasts via headsets.
Preferably, yeah.
In 5 years. Awesome. No, that is super helpful.
I mean, you had film cameras. Today, movies are being shot on iPhones, right?
Yeah.
So we moved.
It's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. So
100%.
Yeah.
We got to imagine it. No, this is very, very fascinating. This brings me close to this part of the conversation, and towards the end, the usual is to help us understand more about the person. So we'll now try to focus on Suraj, the individual, who is a founder, entrepreneurial, has had an exit, and is now building a super challenging category-creating company. Within that landscape, before I get into the more gyani stuff, I would love to understand, and this is usually a trick question. People usually pause on this one. But if I had to ask a room of your friends to describe Suraj, what would they say?
Oh, nice question. I think the pause is needed.
Yes.
I don't know. See, I'm a person who is not on social media. I'm a person who does not enjoy likes or like to share my, my personal life as online, right? But people know me. Like, I will not call you on your birthday and wish you because I don't have Facebook reminding me that. But they know that I come from good faith, right? Like, if I am needed, I'll be there.
Sure.
And I think that's also translated in my business, right? I keep my vendor relations very, very interpersonal, and I care a lot about their problems, their financial problems, or their P&L if they need help with that. So just again, coming back to my personal, so yeah, I think they would both, we have a love-hate relationship in general. Most of my friends hate me first, but then they love me. So that's pretty much how my friends look at me, and I feel that's pretty much it.
Interesting.
Like, I don't, I don't sugarcoat stuff. Like, if a friend is looking at buying a new car, I will first tell him how stupid he is to buy that car, and then try to derive it through math.
Support him.
Yeah, and then eventually, like, you've done your hard work, so I think I'll support you. But then probably think twice before doing it. So that's the kind of guy I am.
Got it. Caring but critical and honest. Okay, that's my summary. You mentioned before the pod that you just became a father. How does that change priorities in life?
Okay, as an entrepreneur, equity went from 100% to, when I got married, to 50%. Now it's sitting at 33%, right? Okay. So every 1 rupee that I bring home comes down to 33 paise to me.
Right.
That's the first step of me looking at life. Second thing is, yes, I need to give more time back home now. That's one of the, like, I'm looking at, hiring more people, primarily because I feel that business has been automated. But then if I, that those evening 3 hours that I spend, if I can like push it back a couple of hours and get some people who can wear those hats and obsess over it a bit, probably that might allow me to have that quality time that I need. Other than that, yeah, there's a general sense of responsibility which was not there before. Like, I thought marriage would do that, but then it didn't as much as it did right now. So yeah, I mean, that sense of responsibility just gives me, and of course, going back home is a very humbling sort of an experience, right? Now, when a vendor calls, after probably 4 rings, if I have not picked it up, he will cut the call because he knows, right? So that's pretty much what the day looks like, or what life has now become.
Got it. No, we've had a couple of people who become fathers recently, and they often say that life sort of changes after this experience. So that's lovely to hear. Back to the business learnings as an individual. If you had to talk about a couple of things that didn't work or have been new from an expectation standpoint, you went into a situation thinking these are the things I will learn, but life sort of surprised you, business surprised you. Can you point to some of those counterintuitive learnings?
Well, let's go back to 2017 when I started, right? I came up, so our life works on the bill of material cycle, right? So I was like, boss, India is a price sensitive market. you can't come up with a $200, $300 bomb. It's not going to make sense. So we came up with a simple audio glass that we thought that we will crack the D2C angle and we will put it into Amazon and we'll, run this game. We lost a lot of money on that. We learned a lot, but then learned a lot of things that we shouldn't be focusing on or shouldn't be doing if we are doing hardware, right? D2C is a decent game, but for the white labeling boys, not for the boys who are, looking at building the technology inside it and are trying to build a factory for it, etc., etc. Those guys need to find a better cash flow cycle, better things and all that. Initially, of course, as a young entrepreneur, I was like, let's go ahead and do that. But the moment that we learned the D2C, playbook, we were like, boss, this is not my game. Like, I don't even know how to play it. I downloaded the wrong game, and now I don't know what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. So then we went ahead and downloaded another game, and then now that we're pretty much good at playing that. Yeah.
You're winning it.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm winning it, but yeah, I'm decently progressing in it. So yeah, that was one key thing. Second thing is, like I said, it trickles back into the relationship building thing, but then don't overcome it. I mean, overcommitting is going to only come back biting you later on. Be it a vendor, be it a customer, be it anybody, right? Even your own team member, don't overcommit. If you don't have the money to pay him, don't show him a carrot at the end of the stick saying that kal paise aayenge. Jo hai, so hai. Kar paoge, aap mere saath jud paoge, judo. Aage dekh lenge jo bhi aayega, right? And we will all enjoy the benefits of whatever we are sowing today. But then this whole vision statement laying down and then, hyping it up, because, you're setting wrong expectations from the get-go, right? That's not the way you have to, you would be able to progress well. And you generally would have now added pressure. And that pressure is not going to allow you to focus, because every time you would want to have that one outcome that you have painted now across a pool of multiple people. You don't want to do that. So that's pretty much, I think, my learnings. I have done all of those things, by the way, right? And I have learned from them. That's why I now carry that as a principle that these things I would never do. No matter how lucrative the opportunity is, I would not do.
Exciting. I think very, very nuanced learnings. I think better one has to practice some of this to actually sort of go through it themselves.
Correct.
But hopefully the objective is that some of this we can grasp and avoid
in
our
our journeys. It would be great to find
journeys.
a guy who just manages to take this as an SOP, operates in it and does not do those mistakes. Because
Absolutely.
those mistakes, like for a third person, those mistakes are just mistakes, right? But for you, it is like really, really confidence hampering.
Yeah.
Like you would want to go back into your shell for like 10 days and like, kya kar diya maine? That sort of a feeling.
Yeah.
And no, in this game, you have to be always on your toes. Everything, every day, you need to speak to these people. So yeah, I mean, you have to be there. You can't take a holiday.
Yeah,
and forget holidays. I mean, forget about that. Like that thing doesn't exist.
Yeah. That's why I think that's the objective of the podcast. Like the hope is that people listening can learn from your journey and the other folks that we get to host and avoid those mistakes, right? Like time is the most valuable asset we have.
Correct.
So thanks for sharing. Do you have non-negotiables or value systems that define just your style of work, your, next steps or whatever you do? Like, is that guided by some internal beliefs that you can share with us?
So, in hardware specifically, I think data is more valuable than instinct.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
I mean, yes, you would believe that this would work, but if there's no data backing it, don't try it. Right. First principles approach in general works phenomenally well, and dive as deep as you personally can. Personally, I'm not talking about secondhand information. Your co-founder will also give you secondhand information. Right. The whole Chinese whisper angle is true, and it would happen. So if there is any information that you want to believe, go yourself, go down there, sit with the person, ask the problem, and try to assess if that problem is valuable enough for you to solve. Right. So, and the problem can be as mundane and stupid as it has to be. But then if it is relevant and if it has caught your attention, dive as deep as you have to before you, cross it off your priorities or cross it off your task list or whatever. So that's something that, I do even today, no matter what. Be it a mold, be it a art decision, be it a website icon for that matter, unless there is data backing it, I will not rest. And I make sure, and that's non-negotiable across any hiring that I do, any vendor that I onboard, any client that I work with also. Even if a client comes and tells me that, boss, this is a problem. I'll be like, where did you learn that? And show me the data that you possess. Because this meeting is going to be a speech. If you want to convert into a dialogue, we both need to have access to the same information that you have studied, right? So that particular thing and that dialogue progresses. Otherwise, it is like, okay, you're giving me information, I'm taking notes, and the Chinese whisper has already begun, right? And that's something that just does not work. So a data-driven approach is something that is very, very important and critical aspect of me looking at any decision that I take, right? So that's one thing. Other than that, like I said, like I can sniff overcommitment in any conversation now. So I stay far away, miles away from that. So if I'm not picking up your phone call, you should know that you overcommitted. Like that's pretty much how it works. Yeah, pretty much that's pretty much it. Like, I mean, I'm not that hard bent, but if I'm hard bent, it's very, very critical, because these are things that are very close to me. And I need things in a particular manner. Call it OCD if you have to, but this is good OCD as at least how I define it.
Got it. Oh, that's very fascinating to hear. Data-driven decisions in hardware. In a world where you weren't doing, in a world where, let's say, extended reality didn't exist, what would you be pursuing?
Some sort of computer to build.
Okay.
I mean, I want to build computers. I'm obsessed with that stuff. And I like doing it. I mean, even if you just throw me inside a room with the tools that I need, I'll just try to build something out of it, right? So it's that obsessive kid who still wants to find closure, and that closure is just not coming. So I think that's pretty much the answer to this question. Like, I would be doing something related to computers, but something physical, not something digital in nature. Yeah.
Got it. That's again very, very exciting to hear, and speaks to the passion that you have for this space. So thanks for sharing. This has been super exciting. I think we've covered a lot of ground across, the macros around extended reality and its specific what you're doing with QWR, which is super commendable. To close the loop, and this is a standard question on the pod, and without being repetitive about the learnings, we usually point to a specific date in the person's history, right? So let's talk about maybe 2018. You've come back from China, you're young, and you get an opportunity to build QWR from scratch.
Right.
What would you tell yourself? And by extension, what can we learn purely from the 7-8 years you've already spent building, a great like sort of hardware play? What would be the core insights that we can take back to the starting point?
It's kind of a difficult question to, dive into. If I dive into it, it'll be a deep dive, and I want to keep it short and sweet. So,
yeah, what are the first things that come to mind?
First things that come to mind are primarily, what the pace at which you think that things will move, they don't move, right? So persist and persevere through that. Because those were pretty much the downtimes that I had, right? And those downtimes were not downtimes, were just patience. I didn't have that patience because I was young and I had energy, and I was like, why is this not happening? Why is this not happening? Yeah. So that is one thing. Second thing is, if someone quotes you something, like, don't take it at face value. There is always like, some sort of hidden element attached to it. Of course, the most important thing is there are no free lunches. So like, forget about that, right? Calculate everything and keep a ledger for everything. Be it a vendor meeting or be it anything, it doesn't matter. Make sure that you are calculative about that. Again, it derives back to the data approach angle, but then still, yeah, you have to be, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you have to keep a ledger for everything. Like, no matter how you do it, I do it on my phone, but do it. Like, keep it as a habit to do. Lastly, I feel, lies never work, right? I have tried, like, white lies or how, sugarcoat it. Truth works. It hurts. It hurts the person in the front. But then once you let it gestate, it will come back to you some way or the other. But truth works. I mean, it is the best thing to do. Just speak the truth. Whatever it is, in the most simplest manner, so that you can communicate that exact moment, the way it happened to that person. Just do that much. That's enough, right? And walk out. It will hurt, like I said, but it's fine, right? Don't try to sugarcoat anything. Don't try to, this whole white lies equation, right? I have had a lot of people do that to me, and really good people do that to me. But I go back to them and tell them only one thing: you could have said it in this much time. It would have pricked me very badly, but then I would have come back to you because, I need you, you need me, and we have to progress further in the future. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would like to close this with.
Incredible. Patience and absolute truth.
Yeah.
I love both of those aspects to end the conversation. Thank you
Awesome.
so much, Suraj. This has been an absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you so much for having me.
I've gotten an opportunity to learn about things that usually don't get spoken of enough in terms of the industry and the kind of company and the domain that it is. So thanks for doing what you do and thanks for being on the show.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Hello. If you made it this far, you've probably watched the entire episode. And if you've done that, I'm really grateful. I and my team try to put in a lot of effort to ensure that we can bring the best quality content to you. So if you liked the episode, if you watched it thus far, my request to you is to share it with people, to subscribe to the channel, and to ensure that we can keep growing. We are everything and anything only because of you, our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll keep bringing to you amazing content. Cheers.